The future has arrived. As the world and humanity itself moves faster and faster into unimaginable possibilities, old institutions that built connection and shaped our sense of meaning are falling by the wayside. In their wake, profound questions about ethics, our purpose, and spirituality demand new answers. Join your host, Scott Mason, in Season 2 of the Purpose Highway podcast. We will explore how these social changes will revolutionize our society. We will learn how they impact our own search for connection and meaning. And we will hear stories of influencers whose lives have had radical change from the inside and found profound connection to others and themselves through a new definition of meaning. The future has arrived. Are you ready?
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hello everybody, it's Scott Mason revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. If you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment on YouTube or a review on Apple. In the meantime, sitting next to me in the front seat today is AnneMarie Mal. AnnMarie is the founder of the Goddess Explorations Academy, which we'll discuss more later today. She's also a chaplain and a leadership consultant. She has a master's degree from the Harvard Divinity School and has helped launch emotional literacy programs at MIT. She is a longtime meditation practitioner and resident of Buddhist temples around the U.S. and has her black belt in Zen sword from the Shim Guang Sa Temple in Brighton, Massachusetts. AnnMarie, you have done a lot. Welcome to the show. It is so good to have you.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so excited to be here.
We're going to have a great time. As we get started, I'm going to lay a little bit of a foundation here. We talk on this season of the show a lot about a silent revolution of thought that's happening right now throughout the Western world and in parts of Asia and the Middle East too. And that thought goes as to a decline in the role of the communities that have historically tied us together in the search for meaning. By meaning, I refer to purpose, spirituality, and ethics. The dominant institution of this sort that's in decline, although it's not the only one, is the historical religious institution that has really provided connection for people historically in the West as they seek to build a culture and seek to find some drive to fulfillment together. You, I believe, are at the forefront, in a way, of this silent revolution, because what this has meant is that people are having to, and sometimes it's by choice, sometimes it's by circumstance, radically rethink spirituality, how they connect to purpose, what ethics mean to them, and how they connect to each other as they search for meaning. You have spent years living in Buddhist temples. You have spent time in India participating in goddess priestess initiations. You've trained with a Native American shaman in bloodline healing techniques. You also have a background in Japanese Shinto. Are these traditions in which you were raised?
No, actually, I was raised as a Catholic, Scott. Yeah.
So, there was a cigarette commercial that had the ultimate slogan that applies in this situation. You've come a long way.
Yeah.
Okay, a Catholic girl grows up and is doing goddess initiation rituals in India. What? What happened? Explain.
Yeah. Ever since I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a priest. I remember being in church. I remember the priest holding up the cup. I remember thinking, that is what I am supposed to do with my life. That is where I'm being called.
Wow.
And I remember telling the teachers when they said, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be a priest. And they said, oh, well, girls can't be priests. And it was a very shocking moment for me where I turned away in my heart a little bit from the faith. Like, here I am running to you with open arms, and you wouldn't have me.
Yeah.
And from that point on, there was a systematic questioning for me where I was constantly asking the priests and the nuns, questions. And a lot of times I was met with the answer, you have to have faith. Like, there's no logical answer to that. And for me, I needed a logical answer. It just wasn't sufficient for me.
Yeah.
And that's what set me on the spiritual path of seeking, really. And I did go for my reconciliation and my confirmation. I went for all the sacraments in the Catholic Church. I still consider myself a practicing Catholic. And it actually took me going and seeking in other religions those answers that I needed and getting them for me to come back to Catholicism and understand the faith newly and have a peace in my heart about it.
Wow. We will go into that journey in much more detail because it sounds extraordinarily interesting. One thing I love about the brief overview of your story that you just shared, though, is the unexpectedness of the conclusion. And that is something I cannot wait to roll up my sleeves in and really explore. But I do want to, before we completely go into your journey, ask you a question that immediately comes to mind. Now, there is an element of radicalism in my life. And that is a belief that if we are given gifts by Providence, the universe, God, whatever you call it, that those gifts were given to us for a reason. In my opinion, it's beyond us really questioning, although we can question why. At the end of the day, we've got them. And so I frankly believe that it is unethical for us, particularly in a free society, to not pursue those gifts and to their ultimate outcome. I'm hearing from you that this calling of yours was a recognition of purpose on your end, and you felt the need to call. To the extent, though, that faith as an answer to logical conundrums is one that is commonly thrown at people when it comes to questions around a whole host of issues, not just purpose, but other questions that people might have. Why is it that you found that unsatisfactory? And do you think that this is a bigger issue when it comes to how people are reacting to a lot of these traditional institutions?
That's a great question, Scott. I think that it's not that people are unwilling to have faith. It's that we're unwilling to blindly be led. So it's like, in my experience, being a spiritual teacher, my students do best when I walk them step by step through what we're doing and I explain why we're doing it. What is the spiritual significance? Without requiring blind loyalty to me or blind belief in me or like blindly following anything I'm doing. It's not that people are unwilling to open their heart to receive the divine. It's that we just want to know what's happening. Yeah.
So you did not receive the answers at first, and you began a journey. Why don't you walk us through that journey?
Sure. I had a lot of questions as a young girl. Things like, what does it mean that Christ died for our sins? You know, like I had heard it so many times, like, but what did it mean exactly? Like my sins? Whose sins? What sins? You know, and it wasn't until later that I think it was actually when I was in India and I was really deeply involved in understanding karmic cycles and how karma is produced by us. So in the Shinto religion of Jōrei, they believe that there's 3 different kinds of karma that every human being has to endure and burn off, so to speak, in this realm of existence. So the first kind of karma is the karma of our thoughts, words, and actions, which we create in our lifetime in this reality. And that's an easy concept to get your mind around.
Yes.
Action, repercussions. There it is. The second is the concept of the karma that we inherit from our ancestors. And there's a lot of old sayings about the sins of the father visited upon the son. And a lot of us are left cleaning up messes from previous generations. So that's another easy one to wrap our minds around. And the third kind of karma is karma from past lives that we bring into this life. And that one can be a little more tricky to wrap one's mind around. But, you know, when I started really understanding laws of karma, cycles of karma, and how that all works, and then also karma of collective societies. You know, societies come together and we create rules and we make agreements and we operate inside those rules. And as groups, we create a sort of energy that perpetuates through time. And sometimes that energy produces good results and sometimes not. And in any regard, as long as we're participating in it, we will have to deal with the repercussions of it.
Wow.
And so will our children and our children's children, which is what has a lot of people crying out for the earth right now. Like, my children's children will have to deal with this kind of issue. And so anyway, you know, once I really started understanding how karma worked, it was like, oh, socially, the entirety of humanity had created a huge amount of karma. And basically, if we didn't want to just get wiped out the way we had been with the flood, which was one option to just clean off a civilization and start from scratch again, you send someone who gives their life to clean the karma, essentially. And there's a lot of stories about Hindu sages and teachers and mystics who take on the karma of their students into their bodies. They'll take illness out of their students into their body and clear the karma through their own body on behalf of the students. And so it was like all these little pieces adding up came together for me to see, like, oh, this was a way to clean out the karma and give humanity a blank slate so we could start fresh again without all of us just getting annihilated in order for civilization to begin again. And, you know, I have a background in anthropology, and we can see throughout time, there have been many, many, many civilizations that have just disappeared off the face of the earth. We don't know where they went. We don't know what happened to these kind of people. And that always fascinated me. You know, I would go ask my professors, like, but what happened to these people? And they'd be like, well, we have theories, you know, and a lot of theories are coming forward about ancient aliens. It's a big TV show now on the History Channel. And I think that there is a yearning that people have to understand, like, what happened to these civilizations? How are they related to us now? Are there lessons we're missing from, you know, what they endured? Can those lessons be found in the spiritual books? How accurate are the spiritual books? And the point that I've come to with a lot of the spiritual books, Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, Quran, for me, is looking at the essence of what the stories are teaching.
Talk to me a little bit more about how exactly you do that, because we live in a culture where, at least according to some of the guests on this show, the credibility of the spiritual books, particularly those that have been the foundation of our religious institutions, have been thrown aside due to a highly literal approach to what they have to say. This is a big one that has some personal feeling states attached to it as a member of the LGBTQ community. We're a perfect example. Literal interpretations of the Bible have condemned people like me to hell over and over, or subjected people to abuse. But it's not just that. There have been other literalist interpretations of these sacred texts that are have oppressed women, have a justified slavery, all these other sorts of horrible things, not to mention how we manage stewardship of the planet, which we are going to get back to by the time this show is over, since you raised it in passing. Why should we choose to follow a less literal interpretation of the sacred texts versus the more literal ones that are, at least, I understand they're not universal in terms of the religious and spiritual discourse in the West, and particularly in the United States, but they have a very loud voice.
Yes. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, Scott, that's part of why I left Catholicism. I was so disturbed by all the spiritual wars that had been happening as a result of Christianity, especially in the Middle Ages, all the wars that were waged in the name of Christianity, and then, you know, the repression of women that subsequently followed, and their bodies, and I couldn't reconcile God with these things, and so I just kind of threw the baby away with the bathwater. It was just like, I can't reconcile it. I've tried, so I'm just going to, you know, try to find my own spiritual path. And I think a lot of people are doing that nowadays. I think a lot of people see the faiths and the religious institutions and the books that go along with those institutions that are followed word by word. And they're like, how can this thing get me to God? Like, somehow logically it doesn't connect for a lot of people. My answer to you about the books and people literally reading the books is more of a personal story of Divinity School and the time spent there learning about the history of how each of these books came to be.
Oh, okay. Share, please.
And once you understand the history of how the books came to be, it's easier to see each book as a piece of a puzzle, a piece of a large puzzle, and not necessarily separate from one another, and not necessarily the truth, but also containing a piece of the truth somehow. So, like, for instance, the Bible was put together by this council called the Council of Nicaea. there was a bunch of scripture floating about in different languages, Aramaic, Arabic, Syriac, all the languages of the region, various stories about Jesus. And this council came together and they were like, we need to put together a series of these stories that make sense. There's a lot of conflicting stories here. Something to know about the council is it was, of course, all men, heterosexual men. And, of course, no women were consulted in bringing this book together. And, years ago in undergrad, I was studying communications and journalism. And one of my teachers used to say, it's not about the news you see. It's about what you don't see.
Wow.
And so it's not about what the book is saying. It's about what the book is not saying. It's about the stories that were left out of the book. So anytime you're reading any sort of spiritual book, you should always be asking, what are the stories that are missing? It's clear to see what the agenda is here and what stories are pointing toward and what stories were specifically chosen to point you in a specific direction.
Right.
And what are the stories that are missing that were probably left out because they didn't align with the agenda of the people collecting the book together at the time. One of those is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene that was specifically left out. It was recently found, but we didn't actually have the technology to look at it properly until very recently.
Interesting.
And there are a few major scholars out of the University of Chicago and Harvard who are doing a lot of work to dig deeper into who Mary Magdalene actually was. Modern scholarship is showing that most likely she was a priestess at that time. When Jesus came on the scene, there were a bunch of temples in that region. So if you imagine, the temple system was still up and running. All the gods and goddess worship side by side with the temples of the Jews. So a lot of the things that Mary Magdalene was able to do, including the anointing of Jesus's feet, would only been able to have been done by a goddess priestess. Most likely a goddess priestess of Isis.
Wow.
She would have had to have a lot of money because at that time, to be sent to be a goddess priestess, you would have to come from a wealthy family because it costs a lot of money to become an acolyte. And also, the women who were the priestesses of these temples were highly regarded, highly educated women. And it says over and over again in the Bible, Mary Magdalene and Mary his mother and Mary Bethesda were always around Jesus. They were always constantly around him. Even when he wasn't with the other apostles, the three Marys were constantly in his company. So it's like, from a common sense perspective, the coolest, most amazing savior of the planet is going to hang out with women who aren't the coolest, most amazing, brilliant people on earth. That doesn't even make any sense. Like, of course they're going to be the best. They're going to be the most awesome. And putting in her scripture would have women believe that they could be in leadership and that they could be closer to Jesus than men even,
Wow.
And so it's like, it's not about, I'm sure that all the stories in the Bible are fine and great and true. It's the stories that we're missing that balance those stories and give context and perspective that has the kind of Christianities we see now with like very narrow expressions and very narrow beliefs. And it was part of the design. And the Quran came together in a similar manner, actually. Same thing, tons and tons of scriptures floating around. A group of men came together. They pulled the ones that they thought were the best. Literally, they burned the rest. They literally went out, sought them, brought them together, and burned the rest. So there would be nothing to conflict with the scripture.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. So talk to me a little bit about how that ties into the very multidimensional and multi-chaptered spiritual journey you've gone on, Buddhist temples, the priestess initiations. Tell us the whole story there.
Oh my goodness. Well, like I said, at 16 years old, I go through my confirmation with the Catholic Church, and after that, I decided that's it. I'm going on my own path. I enter college when I'm 17, and I start taking religious studies classes, and I take a class called Spiritual Sites of Northern New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And I travel to all these spiritual communities, praying with, singing with, eating with all these different people from different religions. And in that moment, I said, this is the answer. All of the faiths have a piece of the puzzle. All of the faiths have a piece of how to get to the divine. And at that moment, I just set out full on to learn as much as I could about every single religion I could. One of the temples that we went to was a Buddhist temple, and it had touched me so deeply, the peace that was in that place. Mm-hmm. And so when I graduated from college, I actually went and did a retreat with this Zen master who was 104 years old at the time. He's actually the Zen master that George Lucas based Yoda on.
You're kidding.
And he looked just like him. It was really incredible. And
wow.
So I'm sitting in the mountains with this man in this temple in the Jemez Mountains of New Mexico.
And he still had it together?
Still had it together. And I swear to you, Scott, this man, he didn't even speak English. He spoke Japanese. He spoke through a translator. It was like the vibration of his voice was so powerful that like the moment the vibration touched my mind, it was like doors in my mind blew open that I didn't even know were closed shut.
Wow.
And I said to myself, if a human being can reach this level of operating, like, then it's possible for all of us. Like, I can do this. If this guy could do this, I can do this. I can be the kind of person who can say one word and I can blow someone's mind open to see possibilities they've never seen before. And that was the turning point. That was the turning point where I decided I will sit and I will meditate until I learn how to be like this man, until I can do what this man can do for other people. And at that time, my grandmother also became ill. She became paralyzed from the waist down.
Oh, no.
And I had all these plans to become an international lawyer and to fight for the rights of indigenous people who were being repressed by corporate institutions. I mean, I just had a whole plan going. And when my grandmother got sick, I stopped everything to become one of her primary caregivers. And the inner turmoil between having my own goals, my own desires for my life, come up against this person who I loved more than anything in the world, who I was ready to do whatever it took to care for, was causing me a lot of pain. I would actually come to her house in the mornings to get her bathed, crying, and she would just hold me and she would say, "Oh, my daughter, like, why are you crying?" And then she would start crying because she felt so bad that she felt like she had taken my life from me. And I said to myself, I've got to get a hold of my brain. My mind is not okay, and I'm looking at the impact of my mental state on this person who is the most loving, sweet, kind human on earth. And I knew, like, my mental health and getting my mind on straight was the most important thing I could do to help her. Like, helping her meant helping me. And that's when I started going to every single meditation retreat I could get my hands on. I was determined to get clear in my brain and not carry my suffering and spread it to others.
Right.
And, you know, I went through wanting to go to other master's programs. I actually started 2 separate master degree programs during that time of caring for her. I couldn't finish them, trying to spread myself too thin. I never could make it happen.
Yeah.
But I kept up with this spiritual practice. I kept going to the spiritual retreats. And after 5 years, I went to this spiritual retreat. It was a 5-day silent meditation up in the mountains at a community that I had actually done research on years prior. It was called the Lama Foundation. And this place is very special and unique because it's an all faiths spiritual community. And the only requisite to live there is that you be on a spiritual path and you be willing to share the practices of that spiritual path with the people in the community. And so I'm there, I'm doing 5 days of silent meditation. And Scott, I swear to you, on the 5th day of total silence, I heard a voice say to me, clear as a bell, you have to apply to Harvard Divinity School. I'm calling you.
Wow.
And
wow.
I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
I was scared. I resisted it. I tried to pretend I wasn't hearing it, and it wouldn't go away for months after. I couldn't even close my eyes without hearing it. Constantly. You must go. You must go.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And was it your voice, or was it like a voice from outside? Was it a male voice? Was it a female? What is it like experiencing something like that?
It's, I would say it's a non-gendered voice. And it's not something you hear with your ears. And honestly, I believe that all of the years of silent meditation prepared me to have a sensitivity for for different kind of energy.
Right.
So it's like when I received the message, it was distinctly an energy like hitting my head in this region here.
Wow.
And it was like the words like appeared in my mind.
Wow.
And it's like when they appeared, because when we hear things, there's a vibration that then translates in the brain, right? So it's like vibrations enter and then the brain makes sense of them. And so it's a similar sensation in that vibrations hit my brain and then the brain was making sense of them, but it was a new way to hear.
Right. Fascinating.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what happened next? Is that how you ended up then at Harvard Divinity School?
I applied. I told all my family. Everyone said, "Oh, you're never going to get in. You're never going to get in. Nobody gets into that school." Here I am, this little girl from University of New Mexico, little spiritually seeking girl. And sure enough, the moment I hit the button to send my application in, I knew, Scott. I knew from the bottom of my heart. And it does go back to that moment when I was in 4th grade and I looked at the priest and I said, that is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it took time for me to develop until I came to the point where I could be sent, for the proper training. But when I went to Divinity School, you have to write your application. What do you want to study? What do you want to research? And so I said, I want to study women Buddhist leaders, because in my time and my experience over the years of meditating, I noticed that there were so many women who were heading up these Buddhist communities, and they were well respected, and they were calm, and they were measured, and they were wise. And I said, how do I become a woman like that? What does it take to become a woman like that? How do I lead from a place of calm, measured wisdom where everyone hears everything coming out of my mouth? You know, I had been raised in an Italian household where women were very loud and men kind of like blew them off, and that was the norm for how men and women were interacting. And I saw these women in leadership roles, and I said, my God, that is so different from anything I've experienced in terms of how women are received and how women leaders are, you know, respected. And so that was my single-minded goal going into Harvard, was I'm going to spend as much time as I possibly can with as many of these wise women who have done the work, who have sat and done the spiritual, you know, time on the cushion, so to speak, and find out what it takes to become these women. And I got to interview the most incredible women. I mean, Lama Tsultrim Allione, she was the first woman to ever go to Tibet to become a Lama. She went through a 10-year rigorous meditation. I mean, Jill Abramson, the editor of the New York Times, I got to sit with her and interview her. You know, I just, with all my might, I went to seek these women and sit with them and learn from them. And when I got out of divinity school, I felt like I had accumulated all this knowledge, and at that time I'd been living in the Buddhist temple, I'd been training for my black belt. I got my black belt while I was at div school, and I said, you know, I have sat with these women, I've learned with these women, I've grown into one of these women, and now I'm going to take all this power and I'm going to show our women leaders how to become women who are listened to and valued and respected, and show them how to have calm minds and lead with wisdom, and not have to pretend that they're men in order to get respect, not have to, you know, dominate in order to avoid being dominated. It was like, this is a new way for us to be women leaders and get respect and be gentle and compassionate and loving, and still be heard and seen and valued for more than just our individual parts, so to speak. And so that's what brought me to where I'm at now with, you know, the Spiritual Leadership Consulting and the Goddess Explorations Academy.
You may be a female leader watching this show or listening to it and saying, that actually is a challenge for me. The only bosses I've ever had were these either men that were very dominating and oppressive, or I may have had bosses that were female that were just copying the men, in some cases maybe even being worse. What baseline advice would you give to someone watching or listening who understands that there could and should be a different possibility for herself as a leader, but can't even begin to imagine what that might look like, let alone what to do?
Meditate.
I'm hearing you're saying, in a way, and answer me honestly, right? Are you saying that meditation is kind of a cure-all?
No, certainly not. Oh my goodness. Do you know how many people I know who meditate who are total jerks? Oh, jerks. And you know, there's so many people who think that they're so spiritually enlightened, and they'll tell you about all the spiritual things they do, and they're just total jerks. And you'll look at them and you'll be like, wow, whatever spiritual thing you're doing, it's not working.
We won't call anyone out today. We'll do that after the show when the camera's off.
You know, and actually I was one of those jerks. You know, I actually, for years, those first years of meditating while my grandmother was sick, there were days that I'd get off the cushion and I would say, how is it that I can be so peaceful on the cushion without, when there's no external stimulus? And the moment I go back into my life, I'm just a jerk to everybody in my life. How can that be? How is it that I can get on the cushion, I can see my mind, I can start to see, the patterns of my mind and where my mind goes, and I can bring myself back and I can start to train my mind to not go all over the place and react to thoughts, react to emotional states. Because that's really what you do when you get on the cushion. A lot of people think that getting on the cushion means you just stop all your thoughts and you become a blissful cloud that floats through life. You get on the cushion and you start to see what happens when a thought arises and you let your mind run away with it without any consciousness that you're doing it.
Right.
And you start to see, oh, wow, I'm not even actually in my life, because the moment I get an external stimulus, my mind just runs away, or my emotions just run away from me, and I have zero control over them. So it's like, if you want to start becoming an adult, you have to meditate, because you have to see how your mind works and how your mind goes, where it runs off to when you get a stimulus.
But how do you avoid being that horror show that you mentioned a few minutes ago, who meditates and takes the steps, but doesn't achieve the results? Unless your desired result is to be a jerk.
So what helped me with that actually was I started doing AA work.
Really?
I started doing AA work. And, in my younger years, I was a troubled youth, getting into all kinds of trouble and dealing with my emotions in all kinds of unhealthy ways. And it was actually, there was a cause and effect a little bit having to do with not getting answers at church and then wanting to deal with my own emotional turmoil in a way that would make the pain less. In any case, I actually had a friend who one day I was complaining about my boyfriend too. And I really had a lovely partner at the time. And I was just talking about what a horrible person he is. Oh, yeah. And I'd been meditating. I had my undergrad in religious studies. I was meditating. I was doing, all these retreats. And I'm telling her, my boyfriend this, my boyfriend that. And she said, AnnMarie, it's not your boyfriend. It's you. And I couldn't believe she said that, Scott. I said, oh my gosh, this is the first person who's ever called me out.
Wow.
Usually, because I was a very smart person, I could enroll people into getting on my side.
Right. The secret downside to having a brain.
That's right. I could really get people to be angry at other people. I mean, it's an Italian thing. When she called me out, I was like, oh my God, you're right. And she said, AnnMarie, come with me to my AA group.
Wow.
At the time, she belonged to adult children of alcoholics. Mm-hmm. I said, well, my parents aren't really alcoholics. She said, it doesn't matter.
Wow.
Come and do the work. You will get self-responsibility in a new way. And so I went. And for 4.5 years, Scott, every week I met with a sponsor. Every week I went to my group. And one of the first exercises I did with my sponsor was something called the God chart, in which she had me write down all the concepts of God I was raised with. And on a separate portion, all the concepts of God that I understood God to be. And over the course of a year, we went through that first God chart, and she helped me let go of every single childhood conception of God that I held. And she helped me embrace every concept of God I said God was to me. And at that time, for me, I believed God to be the space between the atoms, the electricity in the air in an electrical storm. You know, it was things that I could wrap my mind around and get behind. And then the day came when she said, okay, can you trust in this concept of God that you say God is?
Right.
And I said, yeah, I can trust it. And she said, can you turn your will and your life over to this concept of God?
Whoa.
And that's the first step. That's the first step of AA work. You have to be willing to turn your will and your life over to God as you understand God to be.
Yeah.
And that was a crucial step, was her helping me discard any of the junk I had brought forward from childhood, my pain about being Catholic and my confusion, and really embracing this concept that I said God was to me. And then being willing, having the willingness inside me to turn my control over to that concept. And then being willing to pray to that concept of God. And it was through that process that I started to pray. And I started to pray for God to remove, you know, there's a series of prayers, but the main prayer is, God, please remove selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and self-pitying thoughts from my mind, body, and spirit. Please remove my self-will that I may be an instrument of peace. And please remove my fear of the future. Remove my fear of economic insecurity. Remove my fear of the unknown. And remove my fear of being alone. And then finally, as anger arises in me today, guide me to where I might be most of service to others. I started saying those prayers non-stop, Scott, non-stop. Morning, noon, and night. Because guess what? I discovered I was a really angry person. I was an angry person. All that meditation hadn't taken away the anger. It had just got me present to how my mind worked. And seeing my mind. So it was like the first step was seeing my mind. Like, oh, external stimulus. I'm angry all the time. That's me. That's AnnMarie. The second part was, now what do I do with this anger? Well, God, the concept of God, I understand God to be. Please take my anger away and direct me to how I can serve others. Would you know my life completely turned around? Night and day.
Wow.
Night and day.
Wow. On a personal level, I can relate to the understanding of service as a driver for our actions and the profound impact that that can have on the life of anyone who chooses to orient themselves that way. I will say that although I have not had a guest on this show who has had a story like this, really, or anything like it, the concept of service as a tool for finding connection to the self and to others that is meaningful is consistent, along with something else that I want to go back to that you mentioned earlier, and that is climate change. I'm surprised. I did not conceive this show as having anything to do with climate change. It's something I'm aware of, and I attempt to do the things that I need to reduce my carbon footprint. I recycle and compost and all of these sorts of things, and I support candidates that are pro-conservation, pro-climate change interventions. Yet, if there's any theme that has come up over and over and over again, irrespective of who the guest is, the last guest that I interviewed, who we started off talking about the Great Resignation and people moving and switching around jobs. All of a sudden, the conversation turned into one about climate change. The first guest we had this season, they were talking about near-death experiences Suddenly the conversation was about climate change. We had a man who studies irreligiosity for a living. All of a sudden the conversation is about climate change. And now, here we are again from yet another angle. You talk about this idea of what I'll call social karma or group karma. I'm sure there's a better word for it at the top of the hour. That you, not so implicitly, say relates to climate change and how we're dealing with the planet. I find it fascinating and actually quite scary when you tied that into the vanished civilizations, the vanished people. We see the ruins, but we don't know who they are, what happened to them. What I'm hearing is if we don't get it together with regards to service to our planet, we could end up the vanished people. What are your thoughts hearing me go through that ramble? Whatever comes to that, into that head of yours.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm going to say something, and it's not as doomsday as it's going to sound. We are going to be the vanished people, Scott. And it's the natural process by which all things are conceived, arise, and complete in this reality. And the Hindus have it that actually we're on like the 100,000th version of this world. Mm-hmm. And that each time the world is born, it grows however it does. Civilizations create themselves however they do, and then they come to an end. Just like every human life is born, lives, and dies, every organism, anything that comes into creation in this realm of existence, in this reality, in this 3D, is born, it lives, and then it completes, it dies. You know, every government is born, lives, and dies. Every civilization, you know, they're born, they rise, they die. It's the nature of reality. And does that mean that we just be nihilistic and just like, oh, nothing matters, you know, let the world go to hell, let it burn?
Well, and that is one response, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, because every time a civilization comes, the point of our existence is to learn. The point of our existence is to experience and to learn and to grow. And then when we complete and our spirit melts back into the ether, we take the lesson that shaped our spirit back with us. So it's like when you are presented a challenge as a human being, you grow when you have to find the answer to that challenge yourself. And every single one of us have had moments in our life where we've come up against something and it's been in the victory of learning how to overcome it that we grew and we became better people. And that's what it means to come up against this challenge of climate change. As a society, as a humanity, we're up against this problem. How we face it will determine how we grow. And then at some point in time, we will end and we will complete. And this moment of time, this friction between the earth and humanity and how we dealt with it will determine the growth of our spirit. And the next time that we have a civilization, that growth will be embodied. And hopefully we do it better. Hopefully we don't have to have a big trash pile in the middle of the ocean in the next civilization. Hopefully we'll carry the knowledge forward. Maybe not. But it doesn't matter. Because the point is to learn. The point is to grow. You know, it's like, I always give the example that a parent puts a sandbox in the backyard for their kids so that the kids can go out there and play and learn and explore and put their hands in the earth and use their imagination to build things. That's what this 3D reality is. We're in a big sandbox. Now, if you poo-poo in your sandbox is going to smell. And that's what we're dealing with. And when you teach a child to clean the poo-poo out of their own sandbox, then they know they don't want to poo-poo there anymore. And they don't do it anymore. And it's like, that's the, you know, And that's what we're dealing with, essentially. We've got poo-poo in our sandbox. How are we going to clean it? Yeah. And are we going to clean it? Or are we just going to sit in our poo-poo? And is our own poo-poo going to poison us? Maybe it will. Maybe our own poo-poo is going to give us illness and then we'll die that way. Or we're going to figure it out and we're going to grow as a humanity, as a society, and we'll continue. But either way, we will learn. And that is the great thing. That is a great gift of being a human being. And that's why Buddhists talk so much about the special, precious gift it is to be born a human. It's the opportunity to learn. In none of the other realms are we given such an opportunity to learn in such a way that we actually clean our karma. Because when we're presented with a challenge and we overcome it, there's a part of our karma that falls away.
Wow.
And it's a very special, precious opportunity to be here.
Yeah. You've said a lot there in terms of really viewing our spirituality in a cosmic way, as well as perhaps the most graphic and perhaps best analogy for how we're dealing with pollution. And other issues that I have ever heard. And this may become part of the Purpose Highway repertoire going forward. I will also say this, AnnMarie. I've learned more from this episode perhaps than any other that I've recorded. And I wasn't expecting that. That's amazing. If there is one takeaway that you would like to share with anyone who is listening, watching, and wants to be a better leader, having learned everything that you have, and even on top of sharing what you have today, what would that one thing be?
Well, it's a two-part.
Go for it.
The first is, it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of our purpose that we're born with, that we're obligated to seek with all of our heart. That moment when I was in 4th grade and I knew with all my heart that I was supposed to be a priest, I protected that little dream and I held on to it at all costs. And that is the first part of what I want to leave people with, is that it doesn't matter what anybody has said to you about why it's not possible to be the thing that you know in your spirit is the right thing. And you have to fight for that thing. And you have to fight for it with all your heart. And it comes from the heart and it leads from the heart. And if I can leave you with anything, it's to keep your heart open and strong and do anything you can to move forward from that place inside you that you know feels right at the center of your being.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
AnnMarie, after hearing such a passionate closeout, people are going to want to find out more about you. Where can they do that?
They can find out more about me at my website, spiritualleadershipconsulting.com. That's for the consulting business. For the women interested in the goddess courses, that website is goddessexplorationsacademy.com.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
AnnMarie, I've got to say it's been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. You've really given me a lot to think about. For everyone tuning in, if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple or a comment on YouTube. And I will see you next time for another trip down the Purpose Highway. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.